Have you ever wondered how someone's story survives for, say, 1700 years? Today, we're jumping back in time to ancient India to see how powerful kings built legacies that would last for centuries. And here's a little secret. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about winning the story. This is a masterclass in ancient public relations.
So let's get right into it. How do we really know anything about these rulers from so long ago? I mean, what were their big wins? What were their personalities like? What did they even look like? When you stop and think about it, it's a huge puzzle. We're talking about a time way before photos, before any kind of mass media. So how on earth did their stories survive? I mean, really think about that. How do you make sure your story is the one that gets told, not just for a couple of decades, but for millennia? The answer isn't just about having the biggest army. It's about winning the narrative. It's about crafting a story so powerful that it literally gets etched into history itself.
Well, the answer lies in one very important word, prashasti. It's a Sanskrit term, and it literally means in praise of. And that's exactly what they were. Think of them as official, state-sponsored biographies written by court poets designed to praise the king in the most over-the-top, glowing terms you can imagine. And they were often carved into stone pillars for everyone to see. This was, without a doubt, the ultimate PR tool of the ancient world.
Okay, so to see just how this worked, let's dive into our first and honestly most detailed case study. We're going to look at a king who absolutely mastered this art of crafting his own image. Let's meet Samudragupta. He was one of the most famous rulers of the Gupta dynasty. And here's the crazy part. Almost everything we know about his reign comes from a single, super detailed prashasti written by his court poet, a guy named Harshavardhana. So, what was the story Harshavardhana wanted to tell the world?
Well, first and foremost, Samudragupta was sold as this unstoppable warrior. But just listen to the language the poet uses. He describes the king's body as charming because it's covered in hundreds of scars from battle axes, arrows, and swords. This is pure propaganda genius. He's turning brutal, violent wounds into a symbol of kingly beauty and strength. Incredible.
But wait, that's only half the picture. While the Prashasti is painting him as this fierce warrior, the coins that were minted during his rule show something else entirely. Here he is, sitting peacefully, playing a stringed instrument called the veena. It's a brilliant move, right? It creates this dual image. On one hand, the fearsome conqueror, and on the other, the sophisticated, cultured poet king, the complete package.
And his PR campaign wasn't just about his personality. It was about projecting immense power. This map, which is based on the info from that very same prashasti, shows the incredible reach of his influence. But here's the thing. He didn't build this empire through brute force alone. No, he was a master strategist.
And this is where his strategy gets really, really clever. Just look at this breakdown. In his own backyard, the green area, he was totally ruthless. He just uprooted the rulers and took over. But down south, the red dots, he defeated them and then let them keep their thrones. For others, he demanded tribute or even used marriage to form alliances. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all conquest. It was a sophisticated, flexible foreign policy made to keep things stable in the long run.
Now, Samudragupta wasn't the only one playing this PR game. Oh no, the prashasti was the go-to tool for any ambitious king. And sometimes, these official praise poems would actually clash with each other, giving us this fascinating peek into ancient rivalries. Okay, so let's turn to two major rivals. In the north, we have King Harshavardhana. His story comes to us from a biography by his court poet. And in the south, we have the Chalukya king, Pulikashin II, whose story is told in a prashasti by his court poet. You've got two powerful, ambitious kings whose empires were basically on a collision course.
So Harsha had been conquering a lot of territory in the east, but his big dream was to push south into the Deccan Plateau. There was just one tiny problem. Pulikashin was standing right in his way. The two massive armies finally met at the Narmada River, and Harsha's seemingly unstoppable advance was, well, stopped.
And this is where the PR battle gets a little spicy. After beating Harsha, Pulikashin's poet, Ravikirti, just couldn't resist a little bit of ancient trolling. See, the name Harsha in Sanskrit means happiness. So Ravikirti put a little pun in the official prashasti, writing that after the defeat, Harsha was no longer Harsha. I mean, that's an official state-sponsored taunt, carved into stone for all of history to see. You gotta love it.
So, we've seen the power of PR, but a strong image alone can't hold an empire together, right? Behind all the epic poems and grand titles, how did these kings actually run their huge kingdoms? Well, the machinery of the state was changing in some really interesting ways.
A few key things were happening. First, a lot of the top government jobs started becoming hereditary, passed down from father to son. Second, you'd have one guy holding multiple, super powerful offices. Remember Harshavardhana, Samudragupta's poet? He wasn't just a poet, he was also the chief minister and the minister of war and peace. And finally, powerful local guys, like the head bankers and merchants, were given a say in how things were run locally. You can see the theme here. Power was becoming a lot more decentralized. And this decentralization even applied to the army. Instead of one massive, centrally paid army, kings started relying on military leaders called samantas. Now, these guys didn't get a salary. Instead, the king gave them a grant of land. They'd collect taxes from that land to maintain their own soldiers and equipment, which they had to provide to the king whenever he needed them. It was a pretty effective system, and it's a big but, if the king ever got weak, a really powerful samanta might just decide, hey, why don't I become the king? All right, we've spent a lot of time in the king's court with all the poets and ministers, but what was life actually like for ordinary people living in these new empires? The official histories don't always say, but sometimes we can find little clues in other places. The famous playwright Kalidasa gives us one little glimpse. In one of his plays, a poor fisherman finds a lost royal ring. The palace guards immediately accuse him of being a thief and treat him horribly. But when the king finally sees the ring, he's so happy he gives the fisherman a huge reward. It's a nice story, right? It shows that even though the system could be harsh, the king's justice could be fair. At least, that's how it worked in the theater. But that idealized view is completely shattered by another account. And get this, it's from the very same poet who wrote the biography praising King Harsha. Banabhatta also gave us this terrifying description of the royal army on the march. He wrote about elephants trampling the huts of villagers, and a trail of destruction so massive that the whole world was swallowed up in dust. It's a brutal reminder that for ordinary people, the glory of the empire often came at a terribly high price. And that brings us right back to our central idea. We know the stories of Samudragupta and Harsha because they had the power and they had the poets to write their own histories. But what about the villagers whose huts were trampled? Or the soldiers who actually left those charming scars on the king's body? Their stories are gone, just swallowed up in the dust of history. And it leaves us with one final big question. If the history we read is really just the PR of the victors, whose stories have been lost to time?